Welcome to another episode of the Caroline Glick Show. We've been through now, we're in the fifth month of the war, and Israel is making extraordinary progress by all accounts in Gaza. And in the meantime, we're facing a major diplomatic assault on the country, on our ability to win a strategic victory by, first and foremost, the Biden administration, which, as we discussed last week, is pushing for or threatening to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state, giving the Palestinians probably the largest prize in history for terrorism if this in fact comes about. And today, the Netanyahu government passed overwhelmingly in the cabinet resolution that rejects unilateral recognition of Palestinian statehood, and Prime Minister Netanyahu also explained that if such a state were to try to move forward without a negotiated settlement with Israel, that would essentially end all possibility of peace between Israel and the Palestinians. That same decision is expected to pass with more than 100 out of 120 votes in the Knesset tomorrow. We're taping on Sunday night. So I wanted to talk today with my old friend and colleague, Diaspora Affairs Minister Amichai Chikli, who about the issue of Palestinian statehood and about how we look at the whole cause of Palestinian statehood in the larger framework, both of the anti-Semitic onslaught against Israel and against Jews in the diaspora, and also in the question of what victory in this war looks like. So on all of those issues, I'm really happy that Minister Chikli was able to join me today. So first of all, thank you very much for coming onto the Caroline Glick Show today.
Thank you, Garoline. It's a privilege. Few comments. First, when you look at the issue of bringing now, after October 7th, the idea of a Palestinian state, it throws me back to the 20s, to the events of 1920, 1921, and 1929, and the events of 1936-39. All the clashes that we had with the Palestinians previous to the creation of the State of Israel, and the policy of the British mandate towards the Jewish Agency and the Balfour Declaration. So what we saw is that after each and every wave...
So wait, can I just interrupt you for 1 second to sort of make clear what you're talking about? Because of the way that the discourse has been moving over the past many months, when we've seen this onslaught against Jews in the West in particular, everybody thinks back to the 1920s and 1930s, and they're talking about what happened in Europe. And what you're talking about beginning in 1920 is the beginning of the British mandate in the land of Israel, and then subsequent waves of Palestinian Arab terrorism against Jews at certain key points during the British mandatory government here. So just to make clear, everybody's talking about, we understand what we're talking about here is the colonialist empire, the British Empire, and it's essentially its war against the Zionist movement and the right of the Jews to national self-determination here.
So we started with the Balfour Declaration and the San Remo agreements, basically said that the mandate for the British is given in order to establish a Jewish state, to place the country in the conditions that will allow the establishment of a Jewish state. That was the idea. And now, after each and every wave of violent events, we saw a withdrawal of the British government from the Balfour Declaration, rewarding the terrorists, rewarding the most radical forces among the Arabs who lived here. By the way, at first, they were not in favor of the Palestinian state. They wanted to be a part of Greater Syria. Later on, they started to speak about a Palestinian state. So, and we saw that violence was very, was worthwhile to go to the violent past, because it gave them a reward. And instead of enforcing the moderate forces, back then, the Nashashibians, the British enforced and empowered the Mufti, the Husseini family, the most radicals. They appoint him to be the Mufti, They blocked Jewish immigration, etc., etc. And the result was, at the end, the Great Rebellion against the British and the Zionists who lived here, and obviously later on, the War of Independence, who ended up with the Nakba. And I'm mentioning that because it's the same philosophy. Okay, there was a major violent event. Okay, we must do something. So let's see what we can do. Oh, why not give them a state? If you will give a state to the Palestinians when the context is the events of October 7, you are basically saying that raping, murdering, beheading, all these atrocities are the greatest things that the Palestinians have done in the past century.
Right. I mean, it's amazing how history always seems to repeat itself when it comes to the West's view, the imperialist powers, the British, and then followed by the Americans in relation to Arab violence against the Jews.
Yeah. And same goes to Neville Chamberlain and the Czech Republic. Okay, we have the Nazis. It's a problem. They're very violent. They're very dangerous. Okay, let's give them Czechoslovakia, and we will bring peace in our time. So it's the same way of thinking, which I think is totally wrong, and it is very, very dangerous, not just for us, but it's very dangerous for the entire region, because you are basically saying to the other terrorist groups all across the region, not just Hezbollah, but it also can be ISIS, Al Qaeda, Iran, the Houthis, that violent and terror are worthwhile, and you can win if you will go to the violent path. So this is, I think, something that is extremely disturbing. I think that first, when you look at the polls within the Jewish population in Israel, only 8% of the Jewish population support Palestinian state currently. It is the lowest point since the 90s, since the Oslo agreements. So there is a consensus that, as for now, speaking about a Palestinian state on the border with, let's say, with Tulkarem and Kalkilia and road number 6 in the heart of the land of Israel is totally irrelevant. And this is across the board. It's not that Bezalel Smotrich or Itamar Ben-Gvir are against Palestinian state and they are the radicals, and all the rest are in favor of a Palestinian state. Absolutely not. The vast majority of Israelis are against the Palestinian state. Those who support the Palestinian state currently, it is basically Haaretz plus Meretz. That's it. And they know it. And because they know it, they want the U.S. to force a Palestinian state. Because they know that from a democratic point of view, they have zero chances to have a support for a Palestinian state from the people of Israel. And therefore, when the U.S. is looking at the situation from a democratic perspective, it is wrong to say we don't respect the sovereignty of citizens of Israel. So it is wrong from the terror point of view.
So I think
and from
what you're
the
pointing out
point
here, Amichai, if I may, is a very, very key insight, because one of the things that we see in the statements by the Biden administration almost consistently, or actually consistently since October 7th and even before that, is that they're constantly trying to personalize the disparities between their administration's policies and Israel's positions by saying that either they're a function of the so-called radicals inside of the government, Itamar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, or they're saying that it's due to Netanyahu's personal political interests, that he wants to do whatever, like defeat Hamas just because he has a political interest in doing so. And it's never true. It's always very much reflective of the overwhelming majority of the position of the overwhelming majority of Israelis. And here, with the
Yeah,
issue
and
of
by the way,
Palestinian
I'm speaking
statehood.
about polls. I'm speaking about polls. I'm just saying it's 8%. That's it. That's the amount of population that supports a Palestinian state from the Jewish population in Israel. There is a vast majority from the center plus center left and the right, the entire right wing, that oppose a Palestinian state and not willing to discuss it at the moment.
Right. So all I wanted to say was that here, I think what's key is not just that the government unanimously passed this resolution this morning, rejecting any kind of resolution of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict that isn't within the framework of bilateral negotiations with Israel, but also that the Knesset is expected to pass an identical resolution on Monday, tomorrow, that says precisely the same thing, with a majority of, likely 106 out of 120 members of Knesset. So, because Yesh Atid and the Avigdor Lieberman's party both said that they were going to support it. So this is something that I think is an incredibly powerful statement by Israel against the idea that we reward October 7th with a state for the Palestinian terrorists who either actively carried this out, or their sponsors, their financiers, their ideological partners, etc., from the Palestinian Authority. I think that this is a profound moment, actually.
Plus a reminder to those who need that we are not under the British mandate anymore. There's a sovereign state, and this sovereign state, the citizens of this sovereign state, will determine their future.
There's another aspect of what you were discussing, sort of the parallel between what happened in the 1930s when the Palestinian Arabs under Haj Amin al-Husseini, who in 1937 became more or less officially a Nazi agent when they started receiving Nazi funding for their terror war against Israel and the British here, and what's happening today, which is this attempt to ignore the regional aspects of the war against the Jews, so that you had pro-Nazi regimes throughout the Middle East springing up, or regimes in the Middle East turned towards the Nazis during this period, and the British kept thinking they could put this genie back in the bottle by betraying the Jews. How do you relate that to what you're seeing today from the Houthis in Iran and obviously Lebanon?
So the similarity is the philosophy that you can feed the beast and it will get quiet, and you can settle down the issue that you have with it. And I think that this is a wrong philosophy. I think it was wrong. And when we looked at what happened in Afghanistan, I think it made the US look very bad in terms of the Middle East and beyond it, not because of the decision to withdraw, but how it was made with Blackhawks and Humvees and endless weapons, sophisticated weapons, night vision. The way this withdrawal was done, right? Yeah. So it created a very negative impact on the region, and it was the first sign for terrorists, for radical groups, that they can move on, that the United States is not what it was. And I think that the decision to push now a Palestinian state when the background is the events of October 7th is the same message. It is a message: we don't want to fight. We don't want to stand for our values. We have lost our moral compass. And let's just settle down things. We just want quiet. And I think that we as a state, we also went into this path, in the previous decades, thinking maybe we can bring allow the Qatarians to allocate funds to Gaza, to open the door, to bring workers. They will have a better life, and maybe they will abandon their radical views. And it turns out that this is absolutely wrong. And by the way, it's not just the Hamas that were the radicals one here, and they invested the money in building the tunnels and buying weapons. I think that the Qatarians knew very well what Hamas is doing, and they are part of the events of October 7. And I see Qatar as an enemy state, and I think it is a mistake to accept Qatar as a negotiator. I think it's a mistake to send the head of the Mossad every other week to speak with the Qatarians. I don't buy the whitewash of Qatar. I couldn't care less about the soccer teams that they buy or their air flight cargo company or all sorts of commercials and fancy hotels that they have over there in Doha. They are the guardians of those who planned the massacre, the guardians of Hania, the guardians of Khalid Mashal, and Musa Abu Marzouk, the heads of Hamas are in Qatar. They hosted the most radical sheikh in the past centuries, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who was expelled from Egypt, and he is the main ideological figure that is behind the suicide bombing and the radicalization of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. They are an extremely negative force. They are spreading their jihadist ideology with Al Jazeera that we saw last week that Al Jazeera reporters are involved directly in terror activities. And we saw it also on October 7th, not just last week. And therefore, I think that this strategy to normalize the relationship with the Qatarians and the idea of pushing a Palestinian state now is a total mistake.
You know, it's interesting what you were saying about the Qataris, because there seems to be a lot of bewilderment about what Israel's position on Qatar is, because we get statements like yours and others from the prime minister has made statements pointing to Qatar's major role in being a state sponsor of Hamas. But on the other hand, you have voices from the military, from the Mossad, who are insisting that Qatar is a positive actor here, and it's really sort of a problem to understand, what Israel's position is, and B, you see that the Qataris are behind all of these Sunni terrorist organizations. It came out, I think, today that Al-Qaeda has rebuilt its forces in post-U.S. Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, that they now have 8 training bases in Afghanistan. This came out just, I think, yesterday, which is an amazing statement of the absolute failure of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. We're back on, where we were in Afghanistan on the 10th of September 2001. And they were behind the ceasefire. The Qataris were the ones who negotiated the American or mediated the American withdrawal from Afghanistan with the Taliban. So it was them. It was them that were they gave shelter to ISIS. They were the home studios of Al-Qaeda, of ISIS, of Hamas, of Islamic Jihad, of every terrorist organization operating in the Middle East. And yet you have, even here in Israel, confusion about how we're supposed to be looking at Qatar.
It's not confusion.
What do you attribute it to?
They are So it's not a confusion. Just like the Qatar gate in the EU, where you found senior EU members with cash, and they were sent to prison. So they are more sophisticated now, but basically they are buying former generals. Yes. It can be consulting, advice. It's all whitewashed, but they have a lobby for them within the security sphere in Israel as well, and also among Jewish leaders. And therefore, they are very, very sophisticated. But I think we need to be far more clear with the Qatarians. and to say Qatar and Hamas are the same, unless proven otherwise. If Qatar want to cut their ties with Hamas, shut down Al Jazeera, stop spreading jihadist propaganda 24/7 in every possible language, then we can discuss with Qatar. Also, I want to mention one last sentence about the Mondial. Yeah. The Mondial in Qatar was the most anti-Semite Mondial since the 30s, the World Cup since the 30s, and I think it was a promo for the world atmosphere after October 7. You can watch the atmosphere in Qatar, and was a forecast for what is about to happen after October 7.
But I think we're going to get to that almost immediately when we turn away from Qatar to the issue of anti-Semitism. But before I do that, I just want to say ask one more thing about Qatar, which is that you see that in 2014, when we had our previous major military battle with Hamas in Operation, what is it called? Protective Edge, Tzuk Eitan. The Obama administration tried to compel Israel to accept Qatari mediation for a ceasefire. It was the Qataris and the Turks were representing Hamas in the ceasefire talks that the Obama administration tried to force on Israel. And it was a joint effort by Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the UAE that compelled the United States to abandon the Qataris and the Turks as the mediators and accept the restoration of Egypt under Sisi as the mediator for a ceasefire, which is what prevented a Hamas victory then. But you fast forward 10 years later, and you see that Qatar has become much more empowered, because today you have Qatar sitting in the middle of the table, and really at least equally important to Egypt, probably more important, and that position is not opposed any longer by the Saudis and the UAE or the Egyptians. And I'm wondering, do you have any sense of why it is that Qatar has become so much more powerful today than it was 10 years ago? After all, in 2017, the position of all of those Arab states was the same as the one that you outlined here: close Al Jazeera, stop your state sponsorship of all these terrorist organizations operating their headquarters in your territory in Doha. None of that happened. So here we are. How do you understand
that? First you mentioned Qatar and Turkey in 2014, and it's very, very important to emphasize the ideological background of both Erdogan, Turkey, not Turkey as a state, but Erdogan himself as leader of a Muslim Brotherhood party, and the Qatarians, who are totally committed to the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood: Hassan al-Banna, Said Qutb, al-Qardawi, and this entire radical jihadist ideology. Now, I think Qatar made some strategic decisions. One of them is hosting the World Cup. I think she managed to whitewash her jihadist philosophy in a very sophisticated state with huge investment. I think that the most important news in terms of backlashing the strategic investment of Qatar is what we saw in Texas. Texas University decided to block the collaboration with Qatar because they understood what is the true nature of Qatar and what's the strategy of Qatar. But let's go back to the hearing in the Congress of the head of MIT, Harvard, Penn. I think that the main reason why they refuse to say that they oppose straightforward, in an unconditional way, the calling for a genocide of the Jewish people is Qatarian money. And we saw ISGAP phenomenal research that's showing the huge amount of money, billions of dollars, that were invested not just in the Ivy League universities, but in specific profession. When you check the difference between STEM students or political science, you can see that STEM students are actually far more in favor of Israel. But when you go to political science and Middle Eastern studies, the situation is much worse. So they made strategic investments, and the result is a very powerful position. I think that October 7 is also an opportunity because the mask of Qatar were removed, and I think it's more clear to those who are willing to look to the reality in the eyes. It's more clear that Qatar is committed to values that are totally contradict Western values.
I think, first of all, I just want to say that the ISCAP study that you're talking about is ISCAP is the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, and they recently put out a very important paper called Qatar Funding of Higher Education, and that was a paper that, among other things, caused Texas A&M to end its cooperative agreement with the Qatari regime, largely because Texas A&M also does a lot of nuclear development, nuclear research that was coming under congressional scrutiny as well, because it could involve the transfer of nuclear information to Qatar that Qatar should not receive. So that could obviously help Iran, which is a partner of Qatar. So Qatar is very important. If we want to take that report and then go to one of the major areas that you are responsible for the government of Israel, which is the fight against anti-Semitism. So before we ask the larger question about what in the hell is happening in the Western world in terms of the explosion of anti-Semitic attacks against Jews all over the United States and Canada and Australia, et cetera, and Europe, obviously, let's just talk for a second about, when you're looking at this phenomenon, how much weight do you place in the argument that a lot of the violence and assaults that Jews are facing in Western countries, first and foremost the United States, is the work of foreigners, is the work of Arab exchange students, is the work of Arab exchange students that are being directed by organs like the Qatari government and others, and how much of it would you ascribe to homegrown, more progressive Americans, professoriate, etc.? How do you see the intersection between foreign funding from Arab governments, first and foremost Qatar, exchange students from Arab countries in these universities, and the domestic American anti-Semitic sentiment?
So we have learned from Professor Robert Weisslich, who passed away, about the red and green axis, meaning the collaboration between radical jihadist groups and the radical left. It's nothing new. It started in the 70s, and it's now in a different stage. What we're seeing, I think, the foundation is the woke philosophy, that is a neo-Marxist philosophy. Only now, instead of the workers and those who own the factories, you have the oppressed groups and the oppressors. So the oppressed it's the BLM, and it's the LGBTQ, and it's other groups, and the oppressors are the white supremacy, and somehow the Jews or the Zionists are those who are the oppressors. Why are we the oppressors? Basically, we're throwing all the sins of the Western civilization in the past centuries upon the Jews. We are blamed for colonialism, imperialism, ethnic cleansing, genocide, apartheid, you name it. And I think it is a fascinating phenomenon, mainly because it is so detached from facts, from the simple facts on the ground. Colonization, the state of Israel is colonizing. So where's the mother state? Where are we sending all the money? Okay, if this is the case, apartheid with Arabs in the Supreme Court, Knesset, doctors, professors, it is a joke. But I think that the main challenge that we have is the shallowness of 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 the students today. I think that Professor Alan Bloom, who wrote the book The Closure of American Mind, forecast what we're seeing now. And I think that his opening comment in his book was that every professor who goes to an Ivy League universities can know for sure that his students believe, like a religion belief, that there is no one truth. Truth is relative. And relativism is the foundation for this new neo-Marxist woke ideology, which is, if you want to place it on a factual ground, it's a total collapse.
I think what's funny about the moral relativism is that it's not at all relative when it comes to the Jews, because, it's not that there's on the one side you have your truth, they have their truth. It's that the Jews are bad, and anybody who indicates otherwise is evil. So that it's not relativism, it's perversion, and so that's very important, because there's nothing relativist about the way that they treat Israel. And by the way, there's nothing relativist about any of their judgments about who the oppressor and who the oppressed are. And these are immutable, and they can't be changed. And they're totally regardless of what's happening on the ground. And that's why you can't convince anybody of anything any longer. You just have to attach yourself to a side that's been called the oppressed if you want to be accepted.
Yeah, so we became the oppressor, the white supremacist. With this is also, it's so funny to sit on discussion on anti-Semitism with Tzaga Malaka, a member of Knesset from the Ethiopian community, and right next to Tzaga Malaka you have Pnina Tamano-Shata, former minister in the state of Israel, also Ethiopian, and somehow a white supremacist. This is really a joke, but I think there's a metaphysic dimension to what we're speaking, because the clash between these philosophies and Judaism is touching the idea of truth. Because we've read Parashat Yitro 2 weeks ago, and in Parashat Yitro, the 10 Commandments, they open with the statement, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. There is a transcendent truth, which is above and beyond the limits of human reach. And this is, I think, a key point to understand, because Judaism stands for the idea of truth, because from truth there's right and wrong. If there is no single truth, transcendent truth, there is no right and wrong. And this is, I think, the philosophical battle that we have with this neo-Marxist ideology that try to diffuse the idea of truth on every single aspect. It can be gender, history, you can choose a field. So this is the philosophical ground of in which the anti-Semitism is growing upon. It is true also for Nazism, which also decided that the Jews and the Jewish philosophy is its worst and number one enemy.
Yeah, we have. So if you want to talk for a second about what's happening on the ground in the West, I mean, I'd like you to kind of put it into the framework as well of the American Jewish, in particular, response to what's happening, because you see that while only 8% of Israeli Jews say today, and it really is the tiny minority that you mentioned, of Haaretz newspaper readers and the Haaretz editorial staff, and the Meretz voters who are so few in number that they didn't even cross into the...
I meant the staff.
What's that?
I said just the staff. It's not the readers. It's
well, some of it's the readers, but and Meretz, which didn't even cross the threshold to get into the Knesset in the last elections. So there's a very small, tiny minority of Israelis. But you look and you see every American Jewish organization of note, practically, whether it's AIPAC, the American Jewish Committee, the ADL, the Reform Movement, they all still support a Palestinian state. And, one of the leaders that's here for the Conference of Presidents now, he said, look, they're terrified. They don't know what to do. They're trying to figure out a way to square this circle. I mean, do you think that they're going to succeed in this? And where do you see the support for Palestinian statehood sort of how does that impact the American Jewish community's ability to defend themselves against the onslaught of anti-Semitism that they're facing?
Yes. So first, on the positive aspect, we did so a tremendous amount of support and solidarity, and a lot of fundraising and many delegations and people who came, and we saw the huge demonstration in Washington, the march, and I think it was very, very important. And I think that this is a moment of awakening also for Jews who lives in America and understand the gravity of the issue of anti-Semitism, and that you cannot escape Jewish identity. And if you want to keep Jewish identity, you need to fight for it. And I think that this sentiment is quite significant in America Jewry. Now, you spoke about, let's say, like the old institutions, traditional institutions, and it's different from what we're seeing on the ground. And about these institutions and their agenda, it's very hard to rethink the idea of a Palestinian state. I'm not blaming anyone, and I'm not rushing to judge. But I think that if they want to be relevant, we need to take, and they need to take, a strong Zionist statement, say we reject a reward for terrorism, we reject a reward for Hamas, because now even to speak about a Palestinian state now is a reward for Hamas. You don't need to establish a Palestinian state. The discussion itself is a reward which puts Israeli citizens under immediate threat, especially when you look, we're in Ramadan coming in the next months, and when you have Ramadan and on the background you have pressure towards a Palestinian state based on October 7, the message for the Palestinian: continue the violence, continue the terror. It is working. It is working. It brings pressure on the state of Israel. So my expectations from Jewish leaders is to represent the will of the Jewish people here in Israel. No reward for terrorism. No reward for violence. We need to say no for a Palestinian state, at least for the moment. And personally, I think that the lesson for October 7 might be totally different from the idea of establishing a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria. Maybe we already have a two-state solution. When you look at the shawarma in Amman, when you look at the cafes that are celebrating the massacre of October 7, what are the percentage of Palestinians in Jordan?
So let's talk about that for a second, because I had actually contacted you several weeks ago. I don't even remember when, for the first time, when you had posted a plan for what Israeli victory, for your vision of an Israeli victory in Gaza. And I had wanted to talk about that with you, and our schedules just couldn't mesh. So we've delayed it until now. And I'm really happy that we did, because we have a lot more to talk about. But I'd like you to now, everybody in the administration and on the Israeli left, including our media by and large, has been putting tremendous pressure on the government almost since day one to say, what is their plan for the day after look like? And the undertone of all of the statements that have been made, all of the diplomatic pressure that's being placed on the government, has been geared towards forcing Israel to accept the establishment of a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria, in Jerusalem, and in Gaza, that would be led by what they like to call a revitalized Palestinian Authority, which would not be revitalized except in the sense that it would be a unity government between Hamas and Fatah, as the leader of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, said in no place other than Doha just a week and a half ago, after he met there with Hamas leaders and Qatari leaders. So what you're looking at now is a an American policy that's obviously supported and aligned with the far left in Israel, that 8% of Israeli Jews that support a Palestinian state, and as you said at the outset of your remarks, is using American pressure, is trying to leverage American support for Palestinians to force their position, which is a radical position unsupported by 92% of Israeli Jews and I think 14% or 85% of Israelis overall, including Arabs. They're trying to force it on us against our will through American pressure. And I saw just now that Jack Lew, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, ascribed Israel's opposition to Palestinian statehood not to any rational understanding of reality on our part, but because we're traumatized. So the idea is you can't make a strategic decision based on your emotions, and the problem is that these little Jews, they just don't understand what's good for them because they're in a state of trauma. And so we, as a responsible adult coming from Washington, we're going to tell them what's right and what's wrong. And you poor little Israelis, we understand your trauma, but you have to do this. And why do you have to do this? He says, because it's the only way to bring about normalized relations with the Saudis. And Israeli-Saudi normalization would be the true face of a victory for Israel against Hamas, because Hamas only slaughtered us on October 7th because they were trying to prevent normalization of Israeli-Saudi ties. So we need to have normalization, and to get there, we have to get over our trauma or just trust our betters in Washington to explain to us that the best thing for us and real victory is defined by normalizing our relations with the Saudis, by agreeing to establish a Palestinian terrorist state run by terrorists who want to annihilate us and continue what Hamas began on October 7th. So you have a big response to that, and I'd like to just stand back and watch the fireworks. So give me your best shot.
Yeah. So first, Hamas needs only one thing in order to say that he won the war, and that is to survive as a functioning organization in Gaza. Therefore, the only way to win the war is to eliminate Hamas in Gaza, to eliminate his capabilities in terms of governing Gaza, and to eliminate his military infrastructure. We are in a very good situation at the moment. The IDF has done an amazing job. We have eliminated the vast majority of Hamas battalions, and we have around 4 functioning battalions in Rafah, and around 1 battalion who is still functioning in the center of the strip. In the other parts, you have terrorists, but they don't get direct commands from an organized mechanism, and they don't have the ability to launch an attack of a squad or a platoon. It's just individuals with RPG. It can be effective, and it's not a joke. But that's the nature of Hamas at the moment, and also the vast majority of Hamas missiles capabilities were destroyed, and therefore we are in a very, very good situation in terms of the military situation. And I think that is exactly why Qatar is pushing so hard to have a deal that will end the war, because they understand that they have one mission, is to make sure that Hamas will survive. And we know we have one mission, or at least Netanyahu knows that we have one mission, is to make sure Hamas does not survive. And when we have some who are confused, and they don't see the military situation, and how do you define victory? We're not looking for a victory that each side can sit in his saloon and say, I think we won. No, I think we won. No, we want a kind of a victory in which everyone understands that Hamas was totally defeated, and that is including the elimination of Ania and Mashal, where is it, in their jacuzzis in Doha or somewhere, someplace else. I don't care. They need to be annihilated. And I'm speaking about the leaders of Hamas, their statesmen like Mashal and Ania and Musa Abu Marzouk. They are all military targets. They are all terrorists. They are all responsible for what happened on October 7th. They were celebrating the massacre in Qatar, in the fancy hotel of Doha, in Al Jazeera Live. And we will remember it forever. And we will chase them forever. And obviously, we have the rats in the tunnels of Rafah, Def and Sinewar. And they have two options. They can surrender or they can be eliminated. That's it. This is victory. When we will have military victory, we can then go to the next questions about how exactly do we organize Gaza Strip for the day after. I think that the basic assumption is a wide perimeter to make sure that the beasts and animals, the rapists, the murderers who came not just from Hamas formal squads, death squads, but also from ordinary Gazans who came and participated in raping and murdering our citizens. So we need to make sure that there will be a way. So this is a wide perimeter between Gaza Strip and our border. And when I'm saying a wide perimeter, I'm speaking about 2.5, maybe 3 kilometers. This is one. Second, the northern part of Gaza Strip, there is a corridor. It's called the Netzarim corridor. We know that the main bases of Hamas were beneath Shifa and beneath Jabalia and beneath Rimal and those neighborhoods. And we will not finish the work in the northern part of Gaza until we finish to eliminate and destroy the underground infrastructure of Hamas. And it can take us, because they've built so much miles of tunnels, so it will be a project that can take us a few years to finish. And until we're finished with eliminating the underground infrastructure of Hamas, there's no discussion about bringing back population to the northern part of Gaza Strip. Also, in terms of missile capabilities, we need to make sure that the missiles range will be as far as possible from Ashkelon, Ashdod, Shderot, Tel Aviv. So this is also important. In the other parts of the Gaza Strip, meaning from Wadi Psor, Nachal Psor, or Wadi Gaza and south,
the Gaza riverbed.
Yeah, so we can allow states who are moderate and are relevant partners. It can be the Saudis, it can be the Emirates, and if they are interested in renovating or making some humanitarian efforts, that's okay. I don't see a situation in which there won't be Arabs living in the center part and the southern part of Gaza Strip. So this is an additional thing. And I think we need to create another corridor in which citizens can go from one side to another, which is, I call it the Sufa corridor. Sufa corridor, I can show you a map. I have it here. You can see it. This is the Sufa corridor between Khan Younis and Rafah. We know Rafah is sensitive, and so we can create a buffer zone in between Khan Younis and Rafah, and to make sure that we have a full control about the people who are moving from one side to another, and to make sure that ammunition, missiles, etc., won't cross into Khan Younis, Deir al-Balah. And if needed, we can operate militarily in Rafah zone in raids of battalions and brigades until the threat is totally removed. That's how I see it.
Two questions. One, I saw that actually Israel is already we're paving or we're building the northern Netzarim route that you're talking about. I think it already has
already
a number. Right, so that's what reserve forces from the engineering corps are now building. And when you're talking about the Sufa route that will cross again from east to west, this would be after Israel takes over Rafiah, or are you of the view that Israel doesn't have to take over Rafiah over Rafah and just
I see two options. I see two options. One is that you create the corridor now and you launch raids from the corridor, not in a massive scale, but a battalion, a brigade, with accurate intelligence. Or it's the other option is to shift the population west to the Muasi, launch the operation against Hamas battalions, and then we can create this corridor once again.
Do you have a preference? I mean, because right now the big fight tactically on the ground between the Americans and the government is over whether Israel's going to wage the decisive battle and take over the international border or not.
I would go for the corridor, because what it will do, it will chunk these Hamas battalions. It will be very, very difficult for them to maintain, and also it will be very, very difficult for them to gain power once again in the future. So I think the corridor is a good option, but also a more massive attack. If you move the population, that's also an option. So I think two options are okay, but the end goal must be one: no Hamas battalions at all in Gaza Strip.
Well, I couldn't agree more. All right, so listen, I want to kind of wrap it up now because I don't want to go on for too long, and I don't want to keep you for too long. But when you present your position, where do you see the friction? Is it within the government, or is it outside? I mean, or is it mainly that Israel is facing an international system that seems to be organized now very strongly in opposition to an Israeli military victory, which is how it's looking more and more from day to day in terms of the Biden administration's obsessive, compulsive support and determination to see the Palestinians rewarded for October 7th by transforming October 7th into their Independence Day.
Yes, so there were voices from within Israel that, as if the government doesn't have a program for the day after, and we saw the huge amount of pressure coming from the outside, and we created the project with several Knesset members from the Likud, Boaz Bismuth, Moshe Saada, Dan Iluz, with two goals. One is to be clear for the army, how do we see the day after? Second, to impact the cabinet, the prime minister. And third, to create a pressure counter to the pressure that is coming from the outside. How do we need to shape the reality in the ground in the next few months in a way that will impact the next few decades? That was the idea. And I think that it was very effective. We saw that the idea of de-escalation zones we learned about it from Meir Ben Shabbat, was accepted. The understanding that humanitarian support, as long as UNRWA is in charge, Hamas is in charge, Hamas is in power. We cannot allow Hamas or Hamas UNRWA to be responsible, because the meaning is that Hamas is still in power. So here we had major achievements. And also I think that the perimeter, Netzarim corridor, these ideas were on the table before. I'm not saying we were not the first to say it, but we were first to say that in terms of humanitarian aid, it is better that the IDF would do it himself than UNRWA. About Sufa
And
corridor.
incidentally, just real quick, parenthetically, I saw there's a movement now, Shurat Adin, Nitzana Darshan Leiter's organization, and others have asked Defense Minister Gallant to designate UNRWA a terrorist organization. Given what we know about UNRWA, do you agree with that sentiment? Do you think that's important to designate UNRWA as a terrorist group?
Absolutely. I think UNRWA has failed throughout the years. It created more and more refugees instead of creating less and less refugees. By the way, we have a celebrity refugees, Rashida Tlaib, a Congress member in the U.S. She's a refugee. There's no one on earth who's been settled in another state and still is considered to be a refugee. There's no other refugees that can pass their status as refugees to the children and grandchildren. And also, I think that throughout the way, UNRWA was totally corrupted from its leadership with many scandals. Hamas managed to place his men inside UNRWA. And the main anti-Semite incitement that brought human beings to commit the atrocities of October 7 is UNRWA education.
Yep. I couldn't agree more. All right. So if you just want to, so you think that the main problem isn't so much domestic in terms of Israel defeating Hamas. It's certainly not the capacity of the IDF to reach a decisive victory.
We are close to a victory. We are close to a clear victory. And I really, my expectation from our closest ally is stay with us, strong, now in this fight. Take the compass and rethink where is north, because if you think that north is to reward the Palestinians now, after October 7 with the state, it means that you actually want to impose a defeat on Israel. That is the meaning of calling for a Palestinian state now. This is as far as you can get from a friendly approach, or from a moral approach, or from a wise strategic approach. I think it doesn't serve U.S. interest. It doesn't serve Western civilization interest, and obviously the Jewish people interest.
I couldn't agree more. Well, I thank you very much for your time, Diaspora Affairs Minister Amichai Chikli, my old friend.
Thank you, Caroline.
I'd be looking forward to having you back on. And next time, I'd also like to talk a little bit about the Northern Front with you, from your experience also as an officer in the IDF, and who operated a lot in the Northern Front in the past. But we didn't get to that today. We'll get to it another time. But I appreciate very much you joining me and talking about these very important issues today. So I'm going to have you back. And in the meantime, thanks very much for coming. And guys, I'll see you later this week with In Focuses to talk more about what's going on here in Israel and more globally. So take care, and we'll see you again soon.